In the unforgiving heart of the Arizona Territory, fortunes were forged in cattle and dust, and lives were extinguished just as quickly. This is the story of Silas Blackwood, a man who had carved an emir from the desert, and his beautiful new bride, Candace, a woman with a smile as bright as a diamond and a heart as cold as a desert grave. When Candace decided her husband's vast fortune was worth more than his life, she sought a secret accomplice. But the man she chose to help her, a silent, watchful Apache cook named Taza, was a keeper of an older, deeper justice. This isn't just a tale of greed. It's the story of a reckoning where the deadliest poison wasn't the one meant for the husband, but the one that had festered in the bride's own soul. The dust of the Chihuahuan desert never truly settled on the Blackwood Cattle Company ranch. It was a constant, shimmering haze that coated the thirsty cottonwoods, the low-slung adobe of the main house, and the faces of the men who worked the vast, unforgiving land. The ranch was Silas Blackwood's kingdom, built from nothing but grit, sweat, and an almost supernatural understanding of longhorn cattle. Silas, now in his late 40s, was a monument of a man, broad-shouldered with hands like cured leather, and a gaze that could calm a spooked horse or freeze a dishonest card player. He was respected, feared, and by all accounts a fair man. But the ranch had a new jewel one that outshone the harsh sun, Candace Thorne Blackwood. She had arrived 6 months prior, a vision from back east, who seemed utterly out of place, and yet somehow perfectly at home. Silas had met her on a cattle business trip to St. Louis. Candace was the daughter of a bankrupt merchant, possessing a porcelain beauty and a demure charm that masked a will of iron. For Silas, a man who had spent his life in the company of rough men and stubborn beasts, she was a revelation. He was utterly, blindingly smitten. Within a month they were married, and he brought her back to his Arizona empire. To the ranch hands, she was an enigma. They saw the way she smiled at Silas, a sweet, cloying smile that never quite reached her pale blue eyes. They saw the expensive fabrics of her dresses, which seemed to reject the very dust of the land that gave her this new life. Jedediah, Jed Stone, the ranch foreman, and Silas's oldest friend, saw it most of all. Jed was a man whittled down by the elements to his essential parts, bone, sinew, and suspicion. "She looks at this place," Jed told Silas one evening, spitting a stream of tobacco juice near a fence post, "like a hawk looks at a chicken. Not with love, Silas, with appetite." Silas had just clapped him on the shoulder, his booming laugh scattering a few nearby hens. "Jed, you've been staring at the hind ends of cattle for so long, you've forgotten what a beautiful woman looks like. She's adjusting. Give her time. She's my queen." But Candace's adjustment was one of calculation, not affection. She walked the grounds not with wonder, but with assessment. Her mind was an abacus, clicking and tallying the worth of every head of cattle, every acre of land, every dollar in the safe she knew Silas kept in his office. This life, this dusty, isolated provincial life, was her prison. Silas, with his rough hands and simple devoted love, was her warden. The ranch wasn't a home. It was a gilded key, and she was already plotting her escape. Her gaze would often fall on the one man on the ranch who was even more of an outsider than she was, Taza. Taza was the camp cook. He was Chiricahua Apache, a man whose people had once roamed this very land as masters before the soldiers and the treaties and the reservations had bled them of their freedom. He was old, though it was impossible to tell how old. His face was a road map of ravines and canyons, carved by time and sorrow, his eyes dark, deep-set, and missing nothing. He rarely spoke, communicating in grunts, nods, or a quiet single word. Silas had hired him 2 years ago, finding him half-starved near the reservation border. It wasn't an act of charity, but one of respect. Silas had fought Apaches in his younger days and knew their resilience. He offered Taza a job, a place to live, and most importantly, his dignity. Taza was responsible for the cookhouse, a domain he ruled with silent, unimpeachable authority. The coffee was always hot, the beans were never burnt, and the biscuits were the best in the territory. The cowboys who initially viewed him with distrust had come to hold a grudging, fearful respect for the old man. They knew he saw everything. Candace, however, saw him differently. She saw not a man, but a tool. In her world, people were instruments to be played, and she believed the old, silent Indian would be the easiest to manipulate of all. He was a savage, wasn't he? A simple creature of the desert. He worked for food and shelter. Surely his loyalty could be bought for a pittance. She began her subtle campaign. She would visit the cookhouse under the pretense of discussing menus, her silken dresses whispering across the rough-hewn floorboards. Taza, she'd say, her voice dripping with false kindness. "Mr. Blackwood so enjoys your stews. I was thinking for his birthday next month, we should prepare something truly special." Taza would just nod his eyes on the fire, never on her. His stillness unnerved her, but she mistook it for subservience. "I have some special spices," she continued one afternoon, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "From back east. Very powerful. They can make a man feel very peaceful, very sleepy." He continued to stir a pot of simmering chili, the rhythmic scrape of the wooden spoon against the cast iron, the only reply. For the first time, a flicker of irritation crossed Candace's perfect features. She was used to men fawning over her, hanging on her every word. This silent dismissal was an insult. "Are you listening to me, old man?" she snapped. For the first time, Taza stopped stirring. He turned his head slowly and fixed his gaze on her. It was like looking into two black, bottomless wells. In his eyes, she saw no deference, no fear, no greed. She saw only a profound, ancient emptiness that seemed to reflect her own dark soul right back at her. "The desert has its own spices," Taza said, his voice a dry rasp, like stones scraping together. "Some bring sleep. Some bring forever sleep." A chill entirely unrelated to the cool air of the adobe cookhouse traced its way down Candace's spine. For a moment, she felt a sliver of fear, but it was quickly replaced by her own arrogance. He understood. He was simply bargaining. "Forever sleep can be a blessing for a man who has worked so hard," she said smoothly, recovering her composure, "and a great reward for the one who helps provide that blessing." Taza turned back to his pot. "The desert provides all the rewards one deserves." Candace left the cookhouse that day, feeling a strange mix of triumph and unease. He had not said no. In her mind, the game had begun. She had chosen her weapon. What she failed to comprehend was that the weapon had a mind and a spirit of its own, forged in a fire far older and hotter than her petty greed. The letter arrived by way of the weekly stagecoach, tucked inside a seed catalogue, addressed to Mrs. Silas Blackwood. It was a flimsy piece of paper, but it held the weight of Candace's entire future. The script was an elegant, impatient scrawl, the words a mixture of cloying affection and sharp instruction. It was from William Vance. William was the other half of her plan. the secret she guarded more closely than any other. He was a gambler and a grifter she'd known in St. Louis, a man with the devil's own charm and a complete absence of morals. He was handsome, slick, and the very antithesis of Silas Blackwood. Where Silas was earth, William was smoke. It was William who had helped orchestrate her chance meeting with the wealthy cattle baron. Their plan was simple, brutal, and they believed foolproof. She would marry the rich rancher, secure her position, and then eliminate him. William would then arrive, a grieving friend from her past, to console the wealthy widow. They would mourn for a respectable period before liquidating the assets and disappearing to San Francisco, or perhaps even Europe. The letter was a prod. "My dearest Candace," it read, "the climate here grows tiresome and my pockets grow light. I trust your own situation is nearing its resolution. I long to see you. Do not tarry. Every day you spend in that dusty hovel is a day stolen from us. Your adoring E." The condescending tone calling her magnificent prison a dusty hovel grated on her, but the urgency was real. Time was slipping away. Silas was a robust man. He could live for another 30 years. She couldn't wait that long. The letter solidified her resolve. It was time to stop hinting and make her move. That evening, after Silas had retired to his office to pore over his ledgers, Candace slipped out of the main house. The moon was a sharp sliver in the ink-black sky, and the air was cool. She clutched a small, heavy purse in her hand. She found Taza where she knew he would be sitting on a simple wooden bench outside the cookhouse, staring into the vast, star-dusted darkness. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low and direct. She dispensed with the pretenses of menus and spices. Taza remained silent, his profile a stoic carving against the night. "My husband, he is a good man," she began the lie, tasting like ash in her mouth. "But he suffers. His heart is weak. The doctor in St. Louis told me it could give out at any moment. He lives in constant pain, a pain he hides from the world." She paused, letting the fabricated tragedy hang in the air. It would be a mercy to help him find peace. A final lasting peace. Taza's gaze did not waver from the distant mountains. The spirits decide the time of peace. Sometimes Candace hissed her patience, fraying the spirits need a little help. She stepped forward and opened her purse. The moonlight glinted off a stack of gold coins. Double eagles. It was more money than a man like Taza would likely see in 10 lifetimes. "This is for you," she said, her voice a seductive whisper. "For your help, for your silence. All you have to do is put a special powder in his coffee, or his stew. He will feel no pain. He will simply go to sleep. Everyone knows of his weak heart. No one will question it." She held the purse out to him. "Take it. Disappear. Go back to your people, a rich man. Or go to Mexico. Go anywhere you want. It doesn't matter to me." For a long moment, the only sound was the chirping of crickets and the distant mournful call of a coyote. Taza slowly turned his head and looked at the gold. His eyes were impassive, betraying nothing. Then he looked at her. Candace felt that unnerving sensation again, the feeling of being weighed and measured by a standard she couldn't comprehend. She had expected greed, perhaps a flicker of fear. She saw neither. The white man's poison is loud. Taza said, his voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable authority. It burns. It twists the gut. It leaves a bitter trail on the tongue. The doctor, a clumsy man, but not a fool, would find it. The sheriff would come. They would look at the young wife who stands to inherit everything. Candace's blood ran cold. He wasn't just refusing. He was analyzing the flaws in her plan. He was intelligent. She had made a terrible, dangerous miscalculation. Panic began to prickle at her skin. Had she said too much? I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, pulling the purse back. Taza gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. You want the husband gone? The gold says so. The fear in your eyes says so. He paused, and his next word stunned her. I will help you. Candace stared, speechless. Relief and confusion washed over her in equal measure. You will? Yes, he said. But not with the white man's loud poison. He gestured toward the dark, sprawling desert. The people have their own ways. There is a route, the dream route. When prepared correctly, it coaxes the spirit from the body. There is no pain, no struggle. The heart simply stops. It is quiet. It is clean. It leaves no trace. He looked back at the gold coins in her hand. But it requires a skilled hand, one who knows the traditions. The price is the same. Candace was suspicious, yet captivated. A native poison untraceable. It was perfect. Better than the crude rat poison she had managed to procure from the general store. It felt fated, a sign that her plan was meant to be. Her arrogance resurfaced, eclipsing her fear. Of course he would help. A savage would do anything for gold. And how do I know I can trust you? She asked, her voice regaining its confident, commanding tone. Taza's gaze was steady. You came to me. You have no other choice. And a Chiricahua does not lie about such things. The spirits of the plants are sacred. To use them falsely is to invite a curse upon oneself. The mention of a curse sent a tiny shiver through her, but she dismissed it as primitive superstition. Fine, she said, thrusting the heavy purse into his hand. His fingers, dry and calloused, closed around it, without a tremor. When the new moon, Taza said, looking up at the sky. In 3 days. It is the time for spirits to travel. Prepare yourself. Tell your husband you are making him a special supper to show your affection. I will prepare the main dish. He will suspect nothing. Candace nodded, a cruel smile finally touching her lips. Excellent. She turned and walked back toward the main house. The whisper of her dress a triumphant sound in the night. She felt powerful in control. She had successfully bargained with the devil, or the next closest thing, and had gotten exactly what she wanted. As her silhouette disappeared into the lamplight of the house, Taza remained on the bench. He opened his hand and looked at the gleaming gold coins. He felt no temptation, no joy. He felt only a profound coldness. He had not lied to her. The dream root was real. It did coax the spirit from the body. But he had omitted one crucial detail. In the hands of a master, the spirit could also be coaxed back. His bargain wasn't with her. It was with justice. And the justice of the desert was patient, subtle, and far more terrifying than a simple death. He closed his fist, the cold metal, a promise of the reckoning to come. The next 2 days passed with an agonizing slowness for Candace and a quiet, purposeful rhythm for Taza. Candace played the part of the doting wife with chilling perfection. She hovered around Silas, adjusting his collar, bringing him cool water, and speaking of the special dinner she had planned. Her touches, which had always been infrequent, were now constant, a spider's reconnaissance before the kill. Silas, bless his trusting heart, basked in the attention. "Jed, you old goat," he boomed at his foreman. "You see, I told you she was the finest woman this side of the Mississippi. She's finally warming to this old place." Jedediah Stone just grunted, his eyes narrowing as he watched Candace laugh at something Silas said. Her laughter was like the chime of a music box, pretty intricate and utterly devoid of warmth. Jed didn't know what was afoot, but the hair on his neck, a reliable barometer for trouble, was standing at attention. While Candace rehearsed her grief, Taza went to work. He wasn't searching for the so-called dream route he'd described to her. That was a half-truth, a story woven to ensnare her. The plant he sought had a different name in his tongue, a name that translated roughly to the Spirit Walker's Thorn. It was not a poison in the conventional sense. It was a gateway. He took a canvas satchel and walked out from the ranch, not towards the well-trodden paths, but deep into the arroyos and canyons that the white men avoided. This was his true home, his pharmacy. The desert, which seemed barren and hostile to the settlers, was to Taza a place of immense power and provision. He moved with an economy of motion that belied his age, his moccasins making no sound on the rocky ground. He passed the fiery blossoms of the ocotillo and the threatening arms of the saguaro. He knew the properties of every plant. He knew which roots could cure a fever, which leaves could soothe a wound, and which seeds, if eaten, could bring madness. The plant he sought grew only in the shade of specific rock formations, where the morning sun could not scorch it, and the moonlight could feed it. He found it after an hour's walk, a scrubby, unassuming bush with greyish-green leaves and small, wickedly sharp thorns. To an untrained eye, it was just another piece of desert scrub. But Taza saw it for what it was. This was sacred datura, a plant of immense power and immense danger. It was a potent hallucinogen and deliriant used by Apache shamans for centuries to induce visions and travel to the spirit world. In small, carefully prepared doses, it could open the mind. In larger doses, it could shatter it. And in a very specific preparation, a secret passed down through generations, it could induce a state of profound paralysis that perfectly mimicked death. The heart rate would slow to an almost imperceptible flutter. The breathing would become so shallow as to be undetectable. The body would grow cold and rigid. It was a journey to the very edge of the abyss from which one could be pulled back only by the antidote, a bitter tea brewed from the plant's own dried leaves. Taza knelt, murmuring a quiet prayer of respect to the plant's spirit. He wasn't taking a life. He was borrowing a sliver of death. Using a sharp flint knife, he carefully harvested not the root as he'd told Candace, but the seeds from a dried pod. He took only what he needed. The desert taught balance above all else. He also gathered a handful of the dried leaves, placing them in a separate part of his satchel. Back in his cookhouse, which now felt more like an apothecary's workshop, he began the preparation. He ground the seeds with a stone mortar and pestle, his movements precise and ritualistic. He worked not like a cook, but like a priest preparing a sacrament. The fine powder was nearly odorless and tasteless, easily mixed into a hearty, flavorful stew. He set this aside. Then he took the dried leaves and began brewing the antidote, a dark, acrid-smelling tea that he stored in a small leather flask. His plan was a razor's edge. He had to administer a dose strong enough to convince everyone, Candace, the cowboys, and especially the town doctor, that Silas was dead, but not so strong that it would send him over the edge permanently. He had to trust in the knowledge of his ancestors and in his own steady hand. Why was he doing this? Silas Blackwood was a white man, part of the wave that had dispossessed his people. But Silas, unlike others, had shown him care respect. He had given him a place without trying to break his spirit. He had looked at Taza and seen a man, not a relic or a savage. And in Taza's worldview, a debt of respect was as binding as any treaty. More importantly, he saw the poison in Candace. It was a spiritual sickness, a rot of the soul that disgusted him. To simply let her kill Silas was an imbalance. To turn her over to the white man's law, a hanging or a prison cell, was too simple. It was a punishment of the body, not the spirit. Taza's justice was different. He would force her to live in the hell of her own making. He would make her confront the ghost of her own crime. On the evening of the new moon, the air was thick with anticipation. Candace, dressed in a demure but elegant blue gown, fussed over the dining table, setting out the best china. She was jittery, her movements sharp and bird-like. She kept glancing towards the cookhouse. Finally, Taza emerged. He carried a large, steaming tureen. It was a rich beef and vegetable stew, its aroma filling the air. It was Silas's favorite. As Taza entered the dining room, he and Candace locked eyes. Hers were questioning, demanding reassurance. His were as flat and unreadable as stone. He walked to the table and with a steady hand served Silas a heaping portion. Then he served Candace. And then he served a third bowl for himself, which he placed at the small side table where he sometimes ate when Silas insisted. Candace's heart hammered in her chest. He was eating it too. It must be safe for him then. The poison must be only in Silas's portion. She had been a fool to doubt him. "Taza, this smells magnificent," Silas boomed, oblivious. He raised his spoon. "Candace, my dear, to you, for making this rough old place feel like a palace." He took a large, hungry mouthful of the stew. He chewed, swallowed, and then smiled. "Best you've ever made, Taza." "Truly." Candace watched her breath caught in her throat, her own food untouched. She watched as Silas took another bite, and then another. She watched as Taza ate his own portion slowly and deliberately. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Nothing happened. Silas finished his bowl and leaned back in his chair, patting his stomach with satisfaction. A cold dread far worse than her earlier panic began to seep into Candace's bones. Had the old man tricked her? Had he taken her gold and done nothing? Was he toying with her? Silas suddenly frowned. "Funny," he murmured, his brow furrowing. "My tongue feels tingly, thick." He tried to stand, but his legs seemed to buckle beneath him. He grasped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "Candace, I don't feel right." His eyes wide with confusion, and a dawning fear locked on his wife. He saw not the concern he expected, but a flicker of something dark and triumphant. His breath hitched. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a choked gasp emerged. His powerful body went rigid, his eyes rolled back in his head, and he crashed sideways to the floor with the force of a felled oak tree. Candace shot to her feet, a silent scream frozen on her lips. She stared at the unmoving form of her husband. It had worked. It had actually worked. From his small table, Taza watched her. He had eaten from the same pot. The powder had been in the tureen evenly mixed. But he had spent the afternoon sipping minute quantities of the antidote, building his body's tolerance, preparing it for the shock. He felt the numbness, the slowing of his own heart, but his mind remained clear. He was the anchor. Silas was the ship he had set adrift on a dark, terrifying sea. And now the storm was about to begin. Candace's feigned scream when it finally came was a masterpiece of theatrical grief. It tore through the quiet of the ranch house raw and piercing. Jed and two other ranch hands, drawn by the commotion, burst into the dining room to find a scene of chilling domestic tragedy. Silas Blackwood, lying motionless on the floor, and his beautiful bride crumpled beside him, sobbing hysterically. He just collapsed, she wailed, clutching at Silas's shirt. His heart. Oh God, his heart. Jedediah Stone's face went pale. He knelt, pressing his fingers to Silas's neck, then his wrist. He felt nothing. He put his ear to Silas's chest. Silence. The man's skin was already beginning to feel cool and clammy. In the corner, Taza stood a silent, grim statue, his face a mask of what could be interpreted as sorrowful shock. "He's gone," Jed whispered, his voice cracking. He looked from his dead friend to the weeping widow, and for all his suspicion, the scene was tragically convincing. Silas had always worked too hard, pushed himself too much. A sudden heart failure was believable. They sent a rider at a full gallop to fetch Doc Miller from Redemption Gulch, 20 miles away. The doctor, a portly man whose medical knowledge was a 50-50 mix of formal training and frontier pragmatism, arrived hours later. He performed a cursory examination by lamplight, listened to Candace's tearful account of Silas's supposed heart condition, and nodded gravely. "It's as you feared, Mrs. Blackwood," he announced, patting her shoulder. "A massive cardiac event. A man like Silas with such vitality. When the heart goes, it goes catastrophically." He saw no reason to suspect otherwise. The grieving widow. The history of a weak heart, the absence of any visible wound or sign of struggle, it all pointed to a natural, if tragic, conclusion. He signed the death certificate without a second thought. The next few days were a blur of somber activity. Men spoke in hushed tones, their hats held over their hearts. A coffin was built. Candace, clad in elegant black, was the very picture of the bereaved widow. She received condolences with a delicate, sorrowful grace, her pale face a mask of heartbreak. Inside, however, her spirit soared. It was done. She was free. She was rich. She sent a coded telegram to William in St. Louis. "Father has passed. Funeral on Friday. Your presence would be a comfort." The funeral was a grim affair, the entire county seemingly in attendance to pay their respects to the cattle king. Candace wept softly into a black lace handkerchief as they lowered the simple pine box into the ground on a lonely hill overlooking the ranch. As the first shovelful of dirt struck the coffin lid, a triumphant thought echoed in her mind. It's over. That night, alone in the vast, silent house, she allowed herself a small, secret smile. She poured a glass of Silas's best whiskey and toasted her own reflection in the dark window pane. 3 days later, William Vance arrived. He strode into the ranch house like he already owned it. His fancy city clothes and polished boots, a stark contrast to the rustic setting. He was handsome, arrogant, and radiated an aura of predatory confidence. "My poor grieving Candace," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy as he swept her into his arms. The moment the door was closed, his demeanor changed. He grabbed her, his kiss hard and proprietary, Did you do it? Is it done? Completely, she whispered, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and relief. It was perfect. The old Indian's poison worked like a charm. No one suspects a thing. And the Indian William asked, his eyes scanning the expensive furnishings of the room. I paid him. He'll probably drink himself to death on the reservation. He's no threat. They spent the evening drinking and planning their voices for the first time, loud and carefree, in the house that had been silenced by grief. They spoke of San Francisco, of selling the cattle and the land of the life of luxury that awaited them. As the night deepened and the whiskey flowed, they retired to the master bedroom. Silas's bedroom, their laughter echoing down the hallway. But their celebration was premature. They had accounted for the laws of men, but not for the justice of Taza. Deep in a hidden cool cellar beneath the cookhouse, Silas Blackwood was slowly, agonizingly returning to the world of the living. For 3 days he had been trapped in a terrifying limbo. He was aware but unable to move or speak. He had heard the muffled sounds of his own funeral, the weeping, the shovels of dirt. It was a unique and profound torture. Taza had been meticulous. After the death, he had insisted on preparing the body himself, an old custom to honor the master of the house. In the privacy of the cellar, he had moved Silas from the coffin to a cot replacing his body with weighted sacks of grain. It was a risk, but the coffin was closed for the funeral, and no one questioned the quiet cook's solemn rituals. Down in the darkness, Taza had carefully administered the antidote drop by drop of the bitter tea. He had sat with Silas, watching, waiting, whispering quiet reassurances in the Apache tongue. Now Silas could move his fingers. His eyelids fluttered. His first breath was a ragged, desperate gasp. Taza was there, holding a cup of water to his lips. Easy, Blackwood. Taza's voice was a low rumble. You have been on a long journey. Silas's eyes, wild with confusion, focused on the Apache's face. Taza. What happened? The funeral. I was dead. Your body slept, Taza said simply. Your spirit watched. Now you are back. Candace. Silas croaked the memory of her triumphant eyes as he fell, returning with horrifying clarity. She did this. She believes you are dead. Taza explained, his voice flat and emotionless. She and her man are in your house, in your bed, drinking your whiskey. They think they have won. A terrible cold fury began to replace Silas's confusion. It was a rage unlike any he had ever known. He had been betrayed in the most intimate and brutal way possible. He tried to rise, his powerful body, still weak and trembling. I'll kill him. I'll kill them both. No. Taza set his hand surprisingly strong on Silas's shoulder. The white man's justice is a bullet. It is too quick. It is an end to suffering. Their suffering is just beginning. He looked at Silas, his dark eyes holding a glint of something ancient and fierce. A man who comes back from the grave is a powerful thing. A ghost holds more terror than a gun. Now you will be the ghost of Silas Blackwood, and you will haunt them until their own black souls crack open. And so the haunting began. It started subtly. The next night, as Candace and William sat in the study, counting their imagined fortune, a cold draught swept through the room, though all the windows were shut. It smelled faintly of Silas's cigar smoke. They dismissed it as the wind. Later, as William walked down the hall, he heard the distinct jingle of spurs on the wooden floor behind him. He spun around. The hallway was empty. Candace awoke in the middle of the night to find the rocking chair by the window. Silas's favorite chair, moving back and forth in the pale moonlight. It creaked with a slow, familiar rhythm. She screamed, and William came running, but by the time he lit a lamp, the chair was still. Taza was the invisible architect of their terror. He knew the secrets of the old house, the way the wind whistled through a loose floorboard in the attic, to sound like a man's sigh, the loose latch on the stable door that he could open from a distance with a well-aimed stone, making it seem as if Silas's favorite stallion had been let out. He would move a pair of Silas's boots from the closet to the foot of the bed while they were at dinner. He would leave a half-smoked cigar, still warm in the ashtray in the office. These were small things. But they began to work on the guilty consciences of Candace and William like dripping water on stone. Their victory started to feel tainted unsafe. The vast, quiet ranch house no longer felt like a prize, but a tomb. And they were beginning to suspect they weren't alone in it. The ghost of the man they had murdered was watching and waiting. The haunting was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Taza's methods were subtle, preying on the superstitions and shredded nerves of the two conspirators. Silas, now regaining his strength in the secret cellar, became an active participant in his own resurrection. His rage had cooled from a burning fire to a block of ice cold and sharp. Under Taza's guidance, he learned the art of being a ghost. One evening, while Candace and William were having dinner, a meal now perpetually tasting of fear, the sound of a lone harmonica drifted in from the porch. It was playing My Darling Clementine, a simple tune Silas used to play off-key after a long day. William, his face pale, grabbed a pistol and burst outside. The porch was empty. The rocking chair was still. There was no one there. But the last mournful note of the harmonica seemed to hang in the air for a moment before fading into the chirping of the crickets. The orchestrator was Taza, hidden in the shadows of the cottonwood trees, a cheap harmonica in his hands. Another night, Candace awoke to a sound from Silas's office. She crept down the hall, her heart pounding with William close behind her. Pushing the door open, they saw the heavy ledger book on the desk lying open. On a fresh page, written in what looked eerily like Silas's large looping script, were 2 words: "Thou shalt not steal." It was Silas himself who had done it. Coached by Taza, he had slipped into the house through a cellar access panel that opened into a back pantry, a route no one else knew. He was in and out in minutes, a silent phantom in his own home. The strain began to tear Candace and William apart. Their shared dream of a life of luxury was curdling into a waking nightmare. The fortune they had killed for now seemed cursed, and the house they coveted felt like it was actively trying to expel them. "It's that damned Indian," William hissed one night, his paranoia making his eyes wild. "He's doing this. He's trying to scare us off so he can have the place to himself." "Don't be a fool," Candace retorted. Her own nerves stretched to the breaking point. "He's a simple old man. How could he be doing all this?" It's Silas. His spirit is still here. He knows what we did." "Spirits don't write in ledgers," William shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "There's a rational explanation for all of this." But even as he said it, he was glancing nervously into the dark corners of the room. Their greed, once a powerful bond between them, now became a source of suspicion. William started to wonder if Candace was trying to scare him away, to keep the entire fortune for herself. Candace, in turn, saw William not as her dashing partner, but as a weak, frightened man who was unraveling under the pressure. The handsome charm she had been drawn to looked like a flimsy, pathetic veneer. The loyalty of the ranch hands was another unforeseen problem. They had loved Silas. They saw William as a slick usurper, and their grief over their boss's death was slowly turning to resentment at this stranger's presence. Jedediah Stone was the worst of them. He watched William with open contempt. "The new boss doesn't sit a horse right," he'd mutter to the other hands, just loud enough for William to overhear. "Looks like he's trying to romance it, not ride it." William, in a fit of pique, tried to fire Jed. The foreman just looked at him with cold amusement. "You can't fire me, city boy," Jed said, his voice low and dangerous. "I work for the Blackwood Ranch, not for the fancy grifter who's warming the widow's bed. This ranch belongs to Mr. Blackwood, dead or alive, and it feels to me like he ain't settled yet." The confrontation left William shaken and powerless. He was the master of the house, yet he commanded no respect. He and Candace were isolated, trapped in their gilded cage, with a ghost and a hostile staff that was loyal to a dead man. The breaking point was a week after the haunting began. It was a stormy night. Rain lashed against the windows, and wind howled through the eaves, sounding like a chorus of tormented souls. Candace and William were in the main parlor drinking heavily, trying to drown out the sounds of the storm and their own fear. Suddenly, from upstairs came a loud, definitive crash. It sounded like the heavy wardrobe in the master bedroom had been overturned. William, emboldened by whiskey, drew his revolver. "I've had enough of this," he snarled. "Whatever it is, I'm putting a bullet in it." William No Candace pleaded, but he ignored her, taking the stairs 2 at a time. He kicked open the bedroom door. The room was dark, lit only by a flash of lightning. In that brief, stark illumination, they both saw it. The massive oak wardrobe was indeed toppled over its contents, spilled across the floor, and standing over it, his back to them, was the silhouette of a large man. A man who looked exactly like Silas Blackwood. Lightning flashed again, closer this time. The figure turned slowly. It was Silas. His face was pale, his eyes hollow and filled with a dead, accusing light. He wore the very suit he had been buried in. Candace's scream was a raw, guttural sound of pure terror. This was no trick of the wind, no subtle suggestion. This was her dead husband, returned from the grave. William, his face a mask of disbelief and horror, did the only thing his panicked mind could comprehend. He raised his pistol and fired. The shot boomed through the house, the smell of gunpowder instantly filling the air. The figure of Silas didn't fall. It didn't even flinch. It simply faded. As William fired again and again, the apparition seemed to dissolve into the shadows until nothing was left but the overturned wardrobe and the bullet holes splintering the wall behind it. The ghost had been Taza, wearing one of Silas's old coats and hats, his lean frame bulked out with padding. He had used the storm as cover, creating the crash and positioning himself perfectly. The moment William fired, he had simply dropped behind the wardrobe and slipped out through an adjoining room. The illusion was perfect. Downstairs, Candace was hysterical. William, his gun empty and smoking, stumbled back down the stairs, his face ashen. "I saw him." "You saw him?" he gasped. "It was him. He's back!" "You fool!" Candace shrieked, her mind snapping. The terror was too much. The guilt was a physical weight crushing her. "You brought this curse on us. It was your plan. Your greed. My greed." William laughed, a high, unhinged sound. "You're the one who poisoned him. You're the one the old Indian gave the poison to. I saw you." You smiled when he fell. "I did it for us," she screamed back. "You did it for yourself," he accused. Their voices rose in a crescendo of panicked, furious accusations, each one trying to cast the blame on the other. They hurled every secret, every piece of their conspiracy at each other like weapons. "You had me murder my husband. You were a willing accomplice. The poison came from your Indian." They were so consumed by their own terror and recriminations that they didn't hear the back door of the parlor swing open. They didn't see Jedediah Stone and two other grim-faced ranch hands standing there, drawn by the gunshots and the screaming. They had heard everything, every last damning word. Jed's face was like thunder. He held an old, reliable shotgun in the crook of his arm. So he said, his voice a low, deadly growl that cut through their hysterics. That's how it was. Candace and William froze, spinning around to see the foreman and his men. The looks on their faces were not of sympathy or confusion. They were looks of cold, hard, frontier justice. The trap so carefully set by Taza had been sprung. Their own poisoned souls had been their undoing. The facade had not just cracked, it had shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The silence that fell in the parlor was heavier than any tombstone. Candace and William stood frozen, their faces etched with the horror of exposure. The sight of Jedediah Stone, his knuckles white around the stock of his shotgun, was more terrifying than any ghost. The specter they had feared was an illusion. The judgment they now faced was horrifyingly real. "Jed, Candace began, her voice a pathetic whisper. The practiced charm, the manipulative grace, it all evaporated, leaving only a raw, pleading fear. "Shut your mouth, woman," Jed said, his voice devoid of any warmth. He didn't even look at her. His cold, furious gaze was locked on William. "So you're the snake he brought back from St. Louis?" William, ever the gambler, tried to bluff his way out. He straightened his waistcoat, attempting a sneer that looked more like a grimace. "You're mistaken, foreman. My good name is William Vance, and this hysterical woman is spouting nonsense. We were frightened by an intruder." "We heard it all," Mr. Vance said. "Another ranch hand, a tough man, named Cletus. Every last word. About the poison, about the plan, about leaving Mr. Blackwood's body in the ground." At that moment, the main doors of the ranch house swung open with a slow, deliberate groan. Standing framed in the doorway, silhouetted against the stormy night, was a tall, broad-shouldered figure. It was not a ghost. It was not an illusion. It was Silas Blackwood. He was paler, thinner, and his eyes held a chilling emptiness. But he was undeniably, terrifyingly alive. He stepped into the room, his boots making a heavy, solid sound on the floorboards. Beside him, like a shadow, stood Taza. If Candace's scream at seeing the apparition had been one of terror, the sound she made now was something beyond that. It was a strangled, inhuman noise, the sound of a soul shattering. She stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with an insanity born of impossible truth. William Vance simply stared, his jaw slack, his face the color of wet ash. All the blood seemed to have drained from his body. He dropped the empty pistol. It clattered loudly on the wooden floor. Silas didn't shout. He didn't rage. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, hollow, and utterly devastating. "Hello, Candace," he said, the words cutting through the room. You seem surprised to see me." He walked slowly toward them, his gaze sweeping over his wife and her lover. It was the look of a man who had been to his own funeral, a man who had seen the absolute abyss of human betrayal. "Silas," how William stammered, looking from Silas to Tarza and back again. The realization dawned on him. The Indian. He tricked us. He never poisoned you. "Oh, he poisoned me all right," Silas said, his voice a low growl. "He just gave me a poison that let me see the truth." He stopped directly in front of them, so close they could see the new hard lines etched around his eyes. "He gave me the gift of listening to you celebrate my death from my own grave. He let me watch you dance on it." He turned his deadened eyes to Candace. "All of it, my dear. The land, the cattle, the money. You could have just asked for a divorce. I would have given you a fortune just to leave. But that wasn't enough, was it? You had to have it all. You had to spit on my memory." Tears were streaming down Candace's face now, but they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of pure, selfish terror. "Silas, please," she begged, falling to her knees. "He made me do it, William. He twisted my mind. I loved you. I swear I did." Silas let out a short, bark-like laugh, a sound with no humor in it. "Love, you don't know the meaning of the word. The only thing you've ever loved is the shine of gold." He looked at Jed. "Keep your gun on them. Make sure they don't go anywhere." Jed nodded, the shotgun held steady. "What do you want to do?" "Silas, sheriff's in Redemption Gulch. We can have a posse here by sunrise. It's a hanging offense." Silas considered this for a long moment, looking at the two pathetic, trembling figures who had tried to steal his life. A hanging felt too easy, too quick. It was the law of the white man, a law that had failed to see the truth. He looked over at Tarza, who stood impassively by the door, a silent observer to the justice he had set in motion. Their eyes met, and in that shared glance a different kind of verdict was passed. It was the justice of the desert Tarza had spoken of, the kind that was patient and thorough. "No," Silas said, finally his voice resonating with a newfound chilling authority. "No sheriff, no rope. That's not their fate." He turned back to Candace and William. "You wanted this land so badly. I'm going to give you a piece of it." He gestured to Jed. "Go to the stables, get them one horse, the oldest, lamest nag we have, and one canteen of water. Nothing else. No food, no guns, no money." A new kind of dread, colder and deeper than the fear of a noose, began to dawn on William's face. "What are you talking about? What are you doing? I'm giving you a choice." Silas said, his voice flat. "To the east is the town a day's ride for a good horse. For the one I'm giving you, maybe 3 days, if you're lucky. To the south is Mexico, a week through hell, and to the west," he paused, letting his words sink in, "is the Sonoran furnace. 100 miles of nothing but rock, sand, and sun. Where you go is up to you." "You can't," Candace shrieked. "That's a death sentence. You're murdering us." "No," Silas replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I'm not. I'm giving you exactly what you gave me a chance. A very slim one. Your fate isn't in my hands anymore. It's in yours. It's up to the two of you. Can your love survive 100 miles of thirst? Can your partnership last when there's only one canteen of water between you?" He looked at them, at their fine clothes and soft hands, and he knew the answer. He was sentencing them not to death, but to each other. He was banishing them to a prison of their own making, where their greed, paranoia, and selfishness would be their jailers, their torturers, and ultimately their executioners. Jed and the other hands hauled the weeping Candace and the stunned, silent William to their feet and dragged them out of the house. They didn't fight. The finality in Silas's voice had stripped them of all resistance. Silas stood in the parlor, listening as the sounds of their pleading faded into the night, replaced by the single set of hoofbeats from a lame horse slowly disappearing into the vast, unforgiving darkness. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Taza. "Your spirit is strong, Blackwood," the old Apache said. It was perhaps the most he had ever said to him at one time. "You walked the edge and did not fall." Silas looked at the man who had saved his life and delivered his justice. "They won't survive out there, Taza." No, Taza agreed, his gaze fixed on the dark horizon. "The desert does not suffer poison. It purges it. They will face the judgment of the sun, the soul, and their own hearts. It is a good death. It is an honest death." Silas Blackwood looked out at his kingdom, the land he had carved from the dust. He had lost his wife, his innocence, and a part of himself he knew he would never get back. But he had won his life, his soul, and a profound, chilling understanding of true justice. The house was quiet again. The storm was over, and the reckoning was complete. In the end, the fate of Candace and William wasn't decided by a hangman's noose, but by the vast, unforgiving desert. Their story is a chilling lesson in frontier justice, proving the deadliest poison is often the greed carried within one's own soul. Sentenced not by a judge, but by the wise Apache cook, they were left to be consumed by the very darkness they had unleashed upon the world. If this tale of cold-blooded revenge captivated you, show your support by hitting, like sharing the video and subscribing for more forgotten sagas from the Wild West. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a story. Let us know in the comments, what grim fate do you believe they met under the desert sun? Until next time, stay sharp.